All right. Hi, everyone. We're back with Matthew Roberts, former US Naval Intelligence and author of the book Initiated. This is part two of our conversation, and we're going to dig deeper into Matthew's experience and his perspective on the phenomenon, the UFO phenomenon. And Matthew, maybe as we're kicking off here, maybe could you spend the first 10 or 15 minutes and just take us through kind of the key points of your experience, your core kind of initiation experience?
Yeah. Um, so I guess it all kind of started. Um, I was working at the Office of Naval Intelligence. I had just arrived there actually in Washington, D.C. And I had this, there's like this whole story arc to the whole thing, right? Because it is an initiatory experience. So it started with kind of I got sick, very sick. I had a saddle pulmonary embolism, that almost killed me, but I think honestly that it did kill me one night and that there was some intervention that happened there, and I was shown that later. But yeah, that was pretty scary.
And this is 2 years after you initially see Gimbal and Go
Yeah,
Fast on the Theodore Roosevelt.
right. This is about 2 years later. Um, and I had transferred from the Theodore Roosevelt kind of to the George Washington for a year, and then to the Office of Naval Intelligence. And so that's where this started to happen to me. I as difficult and kind of strange as the saddle pulmonary embolism was, the strange part about it to me was that I almost like didn't care about it, right? I almost didn't care, right? But I feel like a lot of other people in that situation, maybe they would freak out probably a little bit more than I was.
Yeah.
You know, waking up to a room full of medical staff and they're telling you they're going to insert, tubes into the arteries on either side of your neck and that they're going to do everything they can for you. but you may not survive this. Um,
And what do you attribute that feeling to?
I, you know, I, Today I kind of attribute it to the fact that, um, just the kind of psychological practice that I have always kind of put in place for myself. I feel like, I just, there are a lot of things to me that don't matter, right? But to other people, they would matter a great deal. Um, and I think, if we're talking to intellectuals here, if you read Plato's Symposium, at the end they describe um, Socrates, his personality type, the way he carries himself and the way he conducts himself is kind of described in at the end of that book, and I, that's kind of me, right? Like I didn't view that as a really big deal. I didn't, even as the doctors were telling me that, you know, that another a woman had come in with the same condition and that she had had a stroke and her lungs did not look as bad as mine did. And she likely was not going to survive. That was what the hematologist told me. Um,
Yeah.
so
And you were essentially in the same position where they thought that you were not going to survive.
yeah. hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. He told me he didn't know how I survived um, this. He had
Yeah.
never
And
seen
what you're
anything like
describing
that.
is essentially like a quintessentially stoic mindset.
I would definitely describe it that way. Even though I was an atheist, I thought when you die, you're worm food, right?
Yeah.
but but there was something about it that I just couldn't care about, right? So that was kind of me in a nutshell. I think other people in that situation would not have handled it the way that I did, or thought about it kind of in the same way that I did. But that was my thinking on it. And so anyway, like all of that happened. I was in the ICU for a while. Um, and they checked me out, they were like, we can't believe you lived through this. Here you go. you know, um, so at ICU, then I spent some time in like the regular hospital unit, kind of recovering. And then after that, they wanted me to kind of recover at home, for a while before I went back to work. So that's what I was doing. I was they call it convalescence in the Navy. You were convalescing. It's kind of like a medical leave. Um, so I was at home, kind of recovering from this. And that was when my brother kind of texted me and he said, hey, there's this article in the New York Times about UFOs and a UFO program within the government. And there's footage, right? And so I saw this text coming through from him and I was like, oh God, like I don't even want to have this conversation with him because of what had happened on the Roosevelt, right? A couple
Yeah.
years earlier. And it was a little unsettling though. This was unsettling to me because you don't, when you're working in a skiff, you don't expect to see that stuff in the New York Times. I mean, sometimes it does happen, but something like this, certainly I was sure was never going to see the light of day.
Right.
So,
Because it was classified.
right. And so I'm sitting there in my truck, you know, um, I had just pulled in and I'm reading this message. And so I check out the article. I'm kind of reading through it. And then I look at the footage and he's like texting me about it. Like he's kind of excited. Right.
Yeah.
And so like, then he calls me and when I looked at the footage, I was like, oh crap. This is the footage from the Theodore Roosevelt that I remembered watching back in 2015. And so I really didn't want to talk to him about it. Right. And so I was like, well, what am I going to say? What am I going to tell him to just make this go away? Because I didn't want to have this conversation. Um, but he called and he was like, the first thing he asked me, he's like, did you see that article in the footage? He's like, have you ever seen anything like that? And I was just kind of like, you know, um, and I didn't want to really talk about it, but I was like, yeah, I've seen this footage before. I was there when it was collected. It was a Theodore Roosevelt in 2015, you know.
Yeah. And blew
And
his
so,
mind.
yeah, it blew his mind, right? Because he knew I was a serious individual. He knew me, my brother, obviously. Um, and he knew that I didn't joke about stuff like this. And he knew what I did, right? And he knew that everything I did was classified and I could never talk about it. But I, I decided to talk about this because I figured it's in the New York Times. It's all out there. Why not?
Yeah.
Everybody knows.
And so
Um,
this was in December 2017
yeah.
when the
Mhm.
article was published. And when were you hospitalized? What month?
It was like the end of September.
Okay. So
Yeah, like the
going
ass end
into
of
the season
September.
of initiation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And so
so,
then you tell your brother about the article and then what happens?
well, then he's stunned, right? The line just goes dead. And so we talk about it a little bit more. And then like he doesn't talk, like we text all the time, right? My brother and I were kind of very close. And so I didn't hear from him for almost a week. And I was like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, oh, just trying to figure all this out, you know,
Yeah.
because he was shocked by it, you
So
know.
it was very impactful for him, but also very impactful for you because had you seen these videos since you were on the Roosevelt in 2015?
No, no, I had not seen him since,
And so what were you feeling
Uh,
beyond the
I
fact that they're classified and that you're maybe in jeopardy for discussing classified content with a family member, but just emotionally, it must have brought you back.
Yeah, it did. I mean, it did. And I had, like I said, I had this emotional reaction to watching it in a skiff on the Theodore Roosevelt, and I would
Yeah.
watch it over and over and over again. I was obsessed with it, all of these videos. And so, and I had this feeling that they were there for me, which was just kind of a weird,
Yeah.
creepy kind of feeling to have. And at the time, I tried to just brush it off because I thought, well, that's just nonsense. I don't know anything about this. This is not me, you
Yeah.
know?
So intellectually, you're trying to push that feeling away, but emotionally, you
Yeah, it's
feel,
bubbling up,
yeah,
right? Um, and so even though intellectually I want to put it away and forget about it, I can't because it's just there. It's just omnipresent, right? And creepy. Um, and so it becomes like this obsession of mine after that to kind of dig into it. And so I look at like who's been associated with this stuff. Like who are the people mentioned in this? Did any of those people write books? You know, what's going on? So that was the analyst in me. I started drilling down on that to
yeah,
see, well, what can I find out? Because I wanted to find out. I was just curious. Um, so I read a bunch of books. I ended up reading Tom DeLonge's books,
yeah.
obviously because he was associated with it. And then I ended up
And
reading,
his group essentially was behind the release of those videos in some way.
yeah, right, yeah. And so that led me to kind of Jacques Vallée because I think he wrote the foreword to one of these books. And so I started reading some Jacques Vallée, um, and I read Hunt for the Skinwalker, which is kind of creepy, by Colm Kelleher, which kind of implies that there's like a paranormal connection to all of this, which I now realize is the truth.
Yeah. And Jacques Vallée kind of implies the same thing in
Yeah.
many ways. Yeah.
hmm Right. And so, I started looking at other things, but those other things that I was looking at, like I would look up videos online, what's the public saying about this, and all of that just seemed like so much nonsense to me, right? I
Yeah.
mean, um there were just people saying very weird things. Um
Yeah. And I think that's the toughest thing about the subject is you're in this world of information that's just,
yeah, it's there's so much. And
yeah, it's not, it requires a high degree of discernment. And even then you're going to step in cow pies.
yeah. Right, because there's so much out there, and
Yeah.
not all of it can be true, right? Because you have like contradictory theories about what all of this is all about. And so it's like, how do I know what's real here in this field? So I kind of reached the end of what I thought would be credible sources, and I was like, well, I guess I'll just have to wait for the release of more information,
Yeah.
right? But but I came across this um kind of online video. It was like a leading meditation, right? Where you kind of meditate and ask. And I was like, well, why not? What's it gonna hurt? You know?
Yeah.
so so I laid down in the bed of my truck one night and I did this, and I had never ever in my life meditated. Never. Uh that had never been a part of my life. It wasn't something I thought about. Um but I found it incredibly relaxing, and nothing had happened, and I was like, well, that's not a surprise, nothing happened here. um so I just kind of figured, well, I'll just have to forget about it, you know um and then just weird stuff started happening. I had some very kind of paranormal experiences that were very frightening, um that kind of led me to this book called The Kabbalion, which I then read
Yeah,
you know
that's right. And I think maybe it's worth talking about those experiences because those are pretty in your face experiences.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was just like, I mean, I'll give a brief kind of synopsis of it. It
Yeah.
was just like, I had been reading all of these books, and I thought, oh, this is, I'm just going kind of crazy here, with, and that's why I'm kind of maybe seeing paranormal or experiencing paranormal things, because I'm in that frame of mind where I'm just like expecting weird shit, right? Maybe, and this is all just in my head, but this book kind of fell in my lap in this very paranormal way that was uh undeniable. And at the time, it was very frightening, incredibly frightening. Um, and so I ended up reading that, right? And
Yeah.
I read it, and I listened to like this recording um, by Andrea Fiore online, uh, and I listened to it a few times because it's not really an easy read, right? Hold on just a second.
Yeah. No problem.
There's a cell phone going off.
Yeah.
Give me just a sec.
And I'll just say for the audience's benefit, the kind of experience that led you to picking up the Kabbalion is you didn't want to read it. It came to you. I forget how it came to you, but then like an electric current takes over your body in your car and forces you to back out of your driveway and go for a drive.
Yeah. Yeah. I got this powerful feeling to get in my car and go drive one night. Um, and it was very intense. It was kind of like that feeling I got when I thought that they were there for me in 2015.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'll just hang on to that, and I'll lay on my bed and just wait until this goes away. And my heart started pounding like like really bad. Like like I was
Like you
it was
thought
it
you were
was
going to have a heart attack or something.
right, like it was almost like it was almost like that pounding of your heart you feel when you get a rush of adrenaline, but I didn't have any adrenaline rush, right? It was just like, you know, get in your car and drive, and I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But I ended up relenting to it. I was like, I'm not going to get any sleep if I don't do this, right? And so I go downstairs, get in my truck, and I back out into like this 3-point turn to get out of the driveway. And I at that moment I was like, God, I cannot. I've been reading these creepy books. They're getting to me. This is all just in my head. It's nonsense. I'm just gonna pull back into this space and forget it. And I'm going to bed. Right. It's Thursday night. I gotta go to work in the morning. It's like near midnight. Um, so forget it. And just then I feel this like electrical shock in my body. And like I don't know, I associate that with like losing motor control of my body, and like my foot slammed on the gas and I was turning the wheel towards the road, which I did not do, right? So that was frightening. That was scary as hell, because at that point I was like, okay, now I know this isn't in my head.
Yeah.
Right. I've never been able to induce the feeling of electrical shock in myself like that. Like, like when you touch a live electrical wire and you feel that kind of buzzing. Um, that's what it felt like. It was kind of very uncomfortable, I would say.
Yeah.
I could feel it in my toenail beds, like my toenail beds hurt from it. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna drive. I don't know what this is, and I figured I was gonna hit the 5 and go south back down to Pax River, because that's where I had been earlier that day. And and it was like a long stretch of road with nothing. It was like farms and just rural area. Um, so so I headed there, but before the freeway, right before I got on the freeway, there was a convenience store there that kind of sold, um, you know, uh, fried chicken and stuff like that. So I stopped there to get a drink.
Yeah.
And then like the feeling washed over me that whatever I was made to leave the house for was going to happen right here at this gas station, which was unreal, right? Like like how can you be having all of these feelings that you know what I mean? Like because people don't often get struck with feelings like that are so intense. And this was certainly the first time I had ever experienced anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm like sitting there terrified, and I hear this voice say, "Get out," right?
What
Like,
did the voice sound like?
it was just like this very, um, kind of deep, angry, like male voice, like,
Yeah.
"Get out of your truck,"
Like
type
deeper
thing.
than Christian Bale Batman.
Well, I don't know, Christian Bale Batman, I'm not really a fan of, but, it was, yeah, it was deeper than that. It was
Yeah.
like naturally deeper than that, right?
Yeah.
And so, I kind of got out of the truck, and then like I see immediately something that's out of place. I see this like homeless man eating with these two women that are like dressed to the nines in professional business attire. And the homeless man is like filthy, right? And they're sitting there at this table at midnight outside this convenience store eating.
Yeah.
And I was
Not
like, this
something you
is
would typically see, like just
no,
out of the ordinary.
that is weird. You would never see that, right? And I wrote in my book at the time because they kind of looked like this. They looked like some of the civilian women that I work with who maybe were going to go brief Congress, and so they got dressed up, very professional, um, like jacket, skirt, heels, everything is put together. Uh, so I'm walking past this, and the woman kind of points at the homeless man. She said, "You see, there's no such thing as coincidence. I never sit at places like this, but something told me to sit here tonight." And I was like, "No way did that woman just say that," because that was what the Kabbalion had stated, and that was the reason I wasn't going to read it.
Yeah.
Right? I wasn't going to read it because it says that there's no such thing as coincidence.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know really what that means, right? It doesn't make any sense to me. It just
Right.
seems like nonsense. And
But you know
so
you're
here,
going to read the Kabbalion now.
right. And so here was this whole experience that was teaching me that no, actually, that's true. There's no such thing as the coincidence. And like the universe is here showing you that in like terrifying form just for you, you know? So that was absolutely terrifying. But I knew I had to read the book, so I read the book.
Yeah. What can I ask? Why do you think it was so terrifying for you? Because I could see other people having this experience of seeing and being intrigued by it or being curious and not necessarily terrified.
Right.
Like definitely
Because
thinking it's weird or just uncanny, or just a startling synchronicity.
right, right. And I get that. And I could see how people, but this is like the first time I've ever experienced something like a synchronicity, right?
Yeah.
And so
And this is something that is totally out of your experience, but also your worldview and challenges your
yeah.
whole worldview.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because like I said, I was an atheist. I didn't believe that there was consciousness to the universe or that there was such a thing as God. I was like, mm-mm. I wanted nothing to do with that. Spirituality, no. That was not me, at all. So certainly, yes, this whole experience did challenge my worldview, right? I mean, the UFO issue has a way of doing that.
Yeah.
Right? It kind of challenges everything that you know to be reality and know to be real. So, um, and so it becomes very uncomfortable for people in that way,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Um,
And so after this night, you become a willing participant in your experience.
yeah. So I read the Kabbalion a few times, and I was like, I don't really understand this book. It talks about the 7 principles that govern the universe. Um, and today, I mean, I look at that book and I'm like, I cannot believe someone was able to sit down and put pen to paper and write this book. It is absolutely incredible. I would say it's one of the most important books in existence.
Yeah.
To be
And
honest
what
with
do
you.
you attribute that to?
What do I attribute the fact that
Well, the base of knowledge that enabled that book to be written in the first place.
um I what I attribute that to is experience. I think that you can experience things in the universe and throughout your life, and you can make sense of them and put things together in a way that in such a way that you can write out and kind of discover for yourself what are the 7 principles that um kind of guide universal law.
Yeah.
And so I feel like if you're like a physicist, a mathematician, a historian, if you're any kind of academic and you don't have a copy of this book, um, you're behind right out the gate, uh, because you don't know anything until you've read this book and understand it. Um, so yeah, I mean that was kind of extraordinary. But at the time, I couldn't make heads or tails of it. I was like, I don't know what this book is trying to tell me.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But then, I will say that the rest of my experiences throughout this initiatory experience kind of and that night actually kind of they were kind of demonstrations of the truth of those principles in this book, um, which is just extraordinary.
Yeah. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So like I read this book, right? And I thought, okay, uh, I guess this is some kind of thing that's going to teach me something. I don't know what. I said, but okay. My attitude was like, okay, I'm ready for more, which of course, you know, nothing could have prepared me for the events of the next several months.
Yeah.
They were intense and they were awful. That's the only way I can describe it. But they were necessary. Um, so the next thing that happened was after I thought I'm ready for more was that I kind of woke up in my room paralyzed, and that's when I saw this blue entity standing next to my bed. Um, it had grabbed my arm in the middle of the night, and I couldn't move, and I started to have this sexual experience. I was in and out of a dream state back in my room. And I didn't know what that meant, right? I thought, oh my God. The next morning I woke up and I wanted to throw up. And I literally like walked outside and I was like dry heaving thinking about it.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought this is like the worst thing that could ever have happened. Um, and I was just like, I didn't understand why. I was like, why did that happen?
And was this night when the light show also took place, or was that a different night?
Yeah. So when I first woke up after being grabbed in the arm, like I saw this. What first it appeared to be like a shadow figure, right? That people report seeing. I could see like this outline of a torso, 2 arms, and a head, and it was just black, right? And then, like as I'm watching this thing standing over me, and I think to myself at the time, I'm like, I should be terrified. There's someone that has just grabbed my arm in the middle of the night. I'm in my bed at home. There's nobody here. I mean, why is there someone standing over me and I can't move? But I wasn't afraid. I was just kind of looking at this wondering what's going on.
Yeah.
And
Because you're also in a state of sleep paralysis.
yeah, something like that, right? And a lot of experiencers report that, being paralyzed whenever they're around, and I am certainly no different, right? So I'm looking at this, and then all of a sudden, like, I see this, my room starts to light up behind this entity, right? And then it gets like really, really bright. And then the light kind of concentrates into like rays of light coming out of its head. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? You know? Um,
Yeah.
and then of course the whole sexual experience starts. I can see that she in fact has blue skin. I can feel that it's much thicker than human skin. Um, so I know it's not human, right? I've never felt human skin feel like that before. Uh, so, I wake up the next morning and I'm just like, what is this? This is crazy. I can't even tell anybody about this because who's going to believe that, right?
Yeah.
First of all, like, they're just going to commit me if I go around talking about this. And so I tell no one, right?
Yeah.
I just kind of kept it to myself. And it was just months of like waking up. I was having constant nightmares. I was terrified to go to sleep. Because I would wake up like every so often and I would see that light show, right? And I would hear like a woman's voice. I would wake up paralyzed. I'd feel the sheets, like the covers thrown out onto the floor and kind of uncover me. And I would feel my body start to slide across the mattress like they're removing me from my room. And sometimes I would hear a female voice that would say, "Shh, don't be afraid," or something like that. And it was just very creepy
Yeah.
to be taken from your room and to not be able to stay awake to see what they were going to do with you. Right. And I would try to fight to stay awake, but I couldn't. I would just, head back into sleep. And so I
Yeah.
had these constant kind of experiences with this. Like I said, nightmares that were so intense. I mean, I can't even, it was like a nightly occurrence.
Yeah.
I,
And if
I,
they took you, do you have any memory of that, or was it all in your bedroom
I assumed that they were taking me, and I looked at,
during this period? Yeah.
yeah. And so one night after this happened, I was like, I got up out of my bed the next morning and I looked at my mattress and I could see that the mattress was like off the box spring. You know what I mean? Like towards the wall, which is the way that I was being slid out of my bed, like towards the wall. And I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, this is fucking crazy, because I would always make sure that it was just so, so that I could tell if something was happening. And I started to like wrap myself up like a burrito at night so that I knew when they were taking me, because they would have to like kind of, remove the comforter out from underneath me, and I would wake up when they were doing that.
Yeah.
Right. So, um, and then I had like a flashbacks of like doing this as a child, where I would lay there and wrap myself in my blanket like a burrito. And I remembered thinking to myself as a child in my bed, that I wanted to cover my ear too, because if they can't, and I remembered thinking, if they can't whisper in my ear, then they can't take me.
Ah, that's so interesting.
Yeah. And so, but at the time that was like, oh my God, that was so fucking disturbing.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you have any explanation for why you thought that?
No, I don't. But I remember doing that as a child, right? And
Yeah.
and I remember as a child, like also like at this time, I remembered hearing voices at night that would like be calling my name,
Yeah.
or and I would remember that kind of familiar feeling of sleep paralysis as a child, like trying to like claw my way off the bed to try to get to my parents. and not being able to do it, you know.
Yeah.
So like all of this, suddenly it was like, oh my God, this this isn't just something that's just happening now. This has been happening my whole life, and I don't understand why.
Yeah.
And so that makes it kind of doubly and triply just terrifying, right?
Totally.
Um,
It's interesting because when you say that you thought that if they can't whisper in your ear, you'll be okay, it makes
yeah.
me think of something Chris Bledsoe described, which is he was told to sing a song in his head when he
Mhm.
was like walking through a field with some people, because then, you know, the entities that he was warned about wouldn't be able to get in his head and then, you know, lose time. He would lose. I think he was warned that he would lose time and, you know,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And so I have like kind of vague recollections of, you know, the house that I grew up in. And like, I remember just as a child, I was very paranoid, like incredibly so. Like I would go around and check the doors to make sure that everything was locked. Um, and there was this one set of doors. It was like they were like these French doors that opened up to a patio in the backyard, from the living room. And I found those doors like, so those were so creepy to me. I hated those doors. And I would always check them, you know. And you know, in retrospect, looking back on all of that, I kind of talked to my brother about it. He was like, "Yeah, I felt the same way about those doors because
wow.
it was like a patio, but then it was like there was a lot of vegetation around, like kind of covering things, and so it was almost like it was a very private kind of patio, like nobody could see because there were vines and things like that, old
Yeah.
growth. And so it was like just the perfect place to go out to a ship, you know, like nobody's gonna see. And so like it just looking back on that, it was like, oh my God, you know, that those doors, that's why I found those doors so creepy.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
you know.
wild. And then the light show that you saw, and I guess you saw repeatedly, I
Yeah.
think you mentioned that that was also emblematic of kind of religious imagery
Yeah. So
that you've seen in kind of the world's religions.
right. And so you see like Jesus or someone, and they're walking or they're standing there, and they've kind of got like this halo around them.
Yeah.
And that was what I saw. And you see that in kind of religious iconography around the world. Um, and so like when I woke up the next morning after that, my immediate thought was that this is awful, that this has happened, and that I was kind of just raped, and I'm like dry heaving and um, just totally disgusted by the whole thing. And then I started to calm down, and I was like, you know, that icon, that light show, I was like, I've seen that, you know, in religious iconography around the world. And what does that mean? You know, I didn't know at the time what it meant, but it does mean something. Um I and that's what I know today. But you know, at the time I was just like, there's something more to this than just they can't. I mean, that
Yeah.
wasn't the only kind of thing I thought at the time, but it was like it kind of got me thinking, well, this is something else, right? This
And is what it means illumination?
well, it's like well, like the whole experience of that, right, was to me kind of like a demonstration of something, right? In other words, the one of the things the Kabbalion says is that the universe is mental, right? That it is a mental creation.
Yeah.
And so therefore you can interact with that mental creation with your own mind, right? And so the way I kind of read that experience today is that it was kind of like saying, well, this is what you understand of creativity, right? Sex. This is how you understand how to create. right?
Right.
At your level as a human being.
Right.
But we're going to introduce to you the idea of the mental universe, right? And that there's a higher plane
Yeah.
where creativity is also represented, but it's completely different than sex.
Yeah.
It does not manifest in that way at this level, but it's the same thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's interesting you said, and I think we talked about this last time, but in I think tantric schools, that generative power and in kind of Kundalini,
Right.
that creative power starts in kind of your the reproductive region of your body, and then it ascends to you know your mind.
Yeah. Right. And
Not
I'll
exactly, but that's kind of directionally where it goes. I mean, they talk, it's kind of your crown chakra and it starts at your root chakra, but yeah.
right. And I'll say that, my favorite kind of representation of this in art is Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. Um,
Yeah.
because I've also come to realize that all of this spirituality is not what people think it is. It's spirituality is psychological, right? It's psychology. Um, and so you see like the Vitruvian Man, and he's in two different positions, right? He's touching the square and he's touching the circle.
Yeah.
And the square, of course, represents like the mundane and profane world. But the circle represents infinity. It represents uh, eternity and God, right? And so that is to say that as a human, you can touch either,
Right.
right? And that you can function in either.
Yeah.
But the man who lives purely in the physical, profane, mundane world, his center, right? The center of that is at his navel,
Yeah.
right? Because he has to be fed,
Yeah. And I
right?
think we talked a lot about the Vitruvian
Yeah.
Man last time. But I think, it's definitely psychological. I think it's
Yeah.
also physiological because that
Yeah.
sexual energy, that creative energy is moving through your body.
Right. Yeah. And so that's kind of how I interpret that experience with the blue being, that
Yeah.
it was an introduction to something on a higher plane, the mental plane. Um,
And so then
uh,
what happens?
so then, I just have like months of just torture, where I'm waking up to the sound of a woman screaming in the house. Like I said, constant nightmares, constant being taken from my bed,
Yeah.
and just constant fear,
Yeah.
right?
And
Like,
wrapping yourself like a burrito.
yeah. And I'm just like, where is this going?
And then
Months
you
of
get to
this.
your breaking point essentially.
I do. Yeah. I just am like, I'm done with this. I'm done with it. I can't do anymore because I'm sleeping like 2 hours a night if I'm sleeping at all. I mean, there were nights I would sit on the edge of my bed in my uniform, right? And I would just be waiting for my alarm to go off, and I would stand up and walk out the door and go to work, having not slept at all.
Yeah.
Um, so there's that. Um, and so I reached a breaking point. I was like, I'm done with this. Don't bother me. I don't see where this is going. Right. I see no point to this. Um, and I was pissed, right? Like angrier than I've ever been before. Really seriously. I could see like the world pulsing in my eyeballs, like because my blood pressure was just shot. I was done. And so that night I kind of woke up and I felt that familiar paralysis, and I was like, here we go. And I really wanted to fucking punch something, right? Uh and then
Yeah.
I kind of my eyes come into focus and I'm looking at this little man standing next to my bed. I can only describe him as a yard gnome. That's what he looked like. And he said, "Don't give up, keep going." And this was telepathic, of course. His lips didn't move,
Yeah.
but I heard it
Yeah.
in my head. And so I, I think I even thought back to him, kind of go fuck yourself is what I
Right.
said. Right.
And was this, I think you mentioned that he had a locked beard.
Yeah. So he had like locked curls in his beard. It was long. So
Yeah.
was his hair, you know.
And when I think about that, I think about kind of ancient sculptures from
Mhm,
Mesopotamia or Persia that have
mhm.
that kind of locked beard. Was it like that?
Yeah, it was kind of like that. It was. And it was white. Like he had a white beard. His skin was white. He was very kind of monochromatic, uh, looking at me slightly sideways.
Yeah. And not white like you and me, white like actual white.
Yeah, like very white. And
Yeah.
and I almost like I talk about the contrast of how white he was is like the king on a deck of playing cards. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Was kind of like that white,
Yeah.
you know.
Interesting.
Um yeah, but he was wearing goggles that of some kind I could see, and there was like a dim red glow behind the glass that I could see there. I don't know what that was.
Yeah.
Some kind of technology, I'm assuming. But so I woke up the next morning and I was like, well, maybe he knows something I don't know. Maybe he knows something I don't know. So maybe I should keep going. Um, and that was kind of when uh, that really was my breaking point, because I thought I can't keep going like this, right? I can't. I'm terrified constantly. I just have to give all that up.
Yeah.
Right. I don't need to be afraid anymore. Uh, are they going to kill me? I don't know. But I clearly have no control over this. So I'm just going to let this be what it is, and I'm not going to be terrified by it. Um and so I started sleeping with my light off. I just was not afraid anymore.
Yeah.
Um I just gave it up, you know. And that was when it started to change. The whole experience started changing after that. Um and I kind of I remained in this kind of I don't even know. I have a difficult time articulating what it was, but I I was talking to someone recently, and they started talking about like this kind of state that they were in when they were pressure washing their driveway, like kind of not thinking about anything, you
Yeah.
know when you're doing some mundane task, and so you have no thoughts in your head whatsoever. And so that's where I kind of remained, because I decided also, not only was I not going to be afraid about everything that was happening, but I wasn't going to think about it anymore, because
Yeah.
it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth thinking about. I was just thinking about it was just going to terrify me, and forget it. So I kind of remained in that state of mind for an extended period of time. And then I started to feel better, um, after a while. And then I started to feel better than I had ever felt my entire life. And that was when they came and took me for like the last time, kind of a light show and kind of sliding towards the wall.
Yeah. And can you
And
describe that?
yeah, so, it was, once again, I'm fighting to stay awake, and I don't know where this is going, but I kind of don't care anymore. So I was just like, what, this is going to be whatever it is, you know? And so I wake up this time, and I'm kind of, I must have been laying on a table or something. Pardon me. And so
Yeah, no
I'm, I'm,
problem.
I'm laying there, and there are these entities standing over me, like looking down at me and looking back at each other. And I could tell that they're communicating with each other. I couldn't hear what they were saying.
And what did they look like?
So they were like radiating white light. They looked like, I would almost say they looked like, like medieval knights. They had beards, uh, robes, They look kind of very human, you know, much more so than the other things I had been seeing.
Yeah.
Um, and so then I fall back asleep again, and then I wake up, and I'm in this like I don't even know how to describe it. I guess it was like it seemed like a temple to me. Um, and
How so?
there were like large columns going off in the distance, and it was kind of lit with fire, you know. Uh, it
And did the
almost seemed,
columns look like stone, or did they look kind of
yeah, they
more
looked like stone
extraordinary?
to me.
Okay.
Um, and so I'm standing there, and these white light beings are standing in front of me, and I see like the blue skinned entities as well, with kind of light where their head is supposed to be. Um, and I know this all sounds very strange.
Well, was it the white where their head was supposed to be? Was that, when she first came to you,
Hmm.
she was using a monitor to show
Yeah.
a former girlfriend's face, I think.
Yeah, well, it looked more like the light show, right?
Yeah.
It was almost like they were just radiating light from their head, but I could see the body was like blue skin. Um,
And was that luminescent at all?
no.
Yeah.
Mm-mm. Um, and so yeah, so one of the white light guys steps forward, and he
And
said,
he looks like, is he in armor? He looks like a knight, you said?
yeah, he's like wearing a robe. It looks like a knight wearing like armor and a robe. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah.
And so he steps forward and he says some things to me, um, which I just found bizarre. Right? He was like, basically like now and what did he say? He was like, your days of judgment start tomorrow, and you're to act as a shepherd of men. And then put me back to sleep. And of course, like I was very uncomfortable with that language, because it sounded so religious to me,
Mhm.
and gross. Because I'm not a fan of religion whatsoever.
And what do you attribute that to? Kind of the close resonance with religious imagery or medieval figures
What do I attribute what to now? Like the
that they, one, are emblematic. They emblemize what we see in kind of our world as religious imagery, um, figures,
right.
architecture. You're in a temple, and that they almost look like people in some ways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I attribute that to is just that I think that that's kind of what they've always been, right?
Right.
And I think that those kind of things get built into myth and religion and stories, right? Because I could see like the experience that I had been through, um from my standpoint after this meeting. I could see that, oh, this experience I had is what kind of gives birth to the world's religions. I could see that very clearly, you
Right.
know. Um,
Yeah. And so I guess what I'm asking is like a chicken or the egg kind of question. Are they the source of where kind of religious styles of architecture and imagery come from, or are they reflecting that?
I would have to say that I my personal belief is that they are the source of that, right?
Yeah.
In that you can see this stuff in Greek myth. Like I opened my book with uh the an ancient myth that was central to the Greek mysteries called the Homeric hymn to the goddess Demeter. And in parts of that, they describe Demeter's divine light, and this predates Christianity, obviously,
Yeah.
so sorry, I've got a phone going off
I
again.
like the ringtone.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so I kind of feel like that's I feel like that's where that imagery comes from, is interaction with them, right? And the ideas that they display with these types of shows. It's almost like it's a theatrical performance, but it's not theatrical performance, because it's representative of something else, right? But
Which
it
is
is.
what?
Well, I like the whole light show and the idea of the mental universe, the rays of light coming from your head, highlighting the mental aspect of this, right? The psychological aspect of it, um, as being a central theme to the experience, right? And so one of the things that I tell people in this is that because all of this is psychological, your ability to integrate trauma or traumatic experiences depends on your success or failure in this process, right? And so if you can't kind of matriculate things in your mind and integrate the traumatic experiences that you're about to have, uh, then you're going to fail, right? And in my opinion, most people fail. Um, that's just what I see.
Yeah.
Because
And
I
is it
mean,
also your experience that the only way that you do integrate those experiences by reaching your breaking point as you did?
oh yeah, for sure, right? Like you have to decide that fear is something that um, you're not really gonna partake of anymore,
Yeah.
right? Um, and actually, like this is one of the reasons why I really love the Homeric hymns, right? Because they're full of this stuff. The Homeric hymn to Hermes, he slaughters this cow, right? And he's cooking it over a fire, and he realizes that he can no longer, because he's an immortal god, he can no longer partake of this beast, right? Even though it smells really good, he knows that meat can no longer touch his immortal throat,
Mm.
right? Meaning that he can't allow these beasts to run wild in his mind anymore. He
Yeah.
has to be psychologically much more together, right?
And that's kind of the concept of the master of animals that you've spoken
Yeah.
about.
Hmm. Yeah, that
And
master it was an ancient motif everywhere in the world,
yeah,
right?
and a motif at many public libraries today.
Yeah. Yeah, we have it with us today, and it's all over DC. In
Yeah.
fact, like you'd be hard pressed to find a set of stairs anywhere that doesn't have two beasts on either side of it, or a bridge that isn't guarded by two beasts, um but many people don't think about the symbolism of that and what it means and what it meant in the ancient world, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Which is mastery over your nature
yeah. Hmm.
and your
Over
emotions.
the primitive nature,
Yeah.
right? So you're the master of these beasts that run wild in most people's minds, and so when you look at religious stories and stuff like that from that context, they start, like, religious stories start to make a little bit more sense, right? Like the whole idea of Athena being born from the head of Zeus, right? It seems like such nonsense, but
Yeah.
she's like the huntress, right? She's taming the wild beasts in the forest.
And she is
Um,
the goddess of wisdom.
yeah, exactly. And so of course she's born of the head of Zeus, because it's
Yeah.
a psychological idea,
And
you
in
know.
the Sistine Chapel, I think Sophia is at, uh, in the panel where God is touching or trying to touch Adam,
Hmm.
and he's kind of wrapped in a cloak. So, and the cloak looks like a cross section of the human brain.
Mm-hmm.
Sophia is in the part of the brain where I think kind of the limbic brain and the pineal gland would be,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
which is, I think, traditionally where the third eye is.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and so the religion is actually full of this stuff. If you understand what you're looking at, it becomes kind of obvious. But of course, like not everyone within a religion knows that. Like when Michelangelo was painting the Sistine Chapel, the Pope would come in to check on it, and he would like throw paint at him and tell him to get out. Like
Yeah.
he really hated the Pope. He had no respect for him whatsoever.
Right. Right. Yeah. And he probably wouldn't have wanted the church to know about the underlying
Reality, yeah.
meaning of his paintings, because
Hmm.
that could have gotten him into a lot of trouble.
Oh yeah, sure. And the same thing with the paintings by Leonardo da Vinci could have gotten him into a lot of trouble. You know, when
Yeah.
he was writing, when he was making the Last Supper, he would come in sometimes and only work on one hand and then leave for the day. And people thought, oh, he's just lazy, you know. Um, and this is documented, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't, in fact, that he was lazy. I think he was consulting charts, celestial charts for looking at constellations in the sky and painting those into the figures seated around the table because they all
Right.
represent constellations, you know. Um,
Yeah. And you see that in Salvator Mundi and in The
mhm.
Last Supper.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
100%.
Um, so, okay, you see the white beans, and I think they also tell you that your life now belongs to all of humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
And
said
so what happens going forward?
yeah, so going forward, I just start to have, it was clear that something had happened to me. I wasn't sure what it was, but I was like, I want to know everything about this, right? Everything about it. And so that's why I started coming across things like the Homeric hymn to the goddess Demeter, which led me to the Greek mysteries, which was like, oh my gosh, this is what they were doing. This was like humans were enabling this contact and this kind of experience in the past, and that's what the mysteries were, the Greco-Roman mysteries. That's what they were all about at their core. Uh, that became obvious to me reading the mythology that was central to them. You
Yeah.
know, so uh, and then I started to look at Christianity, and I could see the same thing in Christianity, the same kind of symbolism, this idea of death and resurrection. Which is kind of the process of initiation. You die and you're reborn as
Yeah.
something else,
Yeah.
Um, and so and so that was kind of what happened. And I started to have experiences where I I was taught things in dreams, or I would hear this voice that would give me, the name of an author to read, what to look at. Um, and so that's what I started doing.
Yeah. And then at some point you report these experiences to your office.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I started talking at ONI about this stuff that had been happening to me. Um, and one of my bosses was like, "Oh, well, I want to take you to see a shrink." So I was like, "Okay, whatever, I don't care." You know. Uh and so I went and talked to this guy, and I was telling him about all of this stuff, right? Being
Yeah.
there in 2015, they're showing up in my room. This is what I'm learning, you know, and how this is ancient and how it's showing me it's ancient, and where these things kind of fit together. And so he was like, who are you working with on this? This is like super important. It's you know what I mean? So not only did he think that I was not crazy, knowing where I worked and then kind of taking in what I had to tell him, but he was like, you need to be working with someone on this. You need to write a book. You need to do something.
That's
you
very
know.
interesting.
Um,
Did he have experience with patients or anyone who had similar experiences or anything of the sort?
I didn't ask him. I did not ask him because I don't know. I guess part of me thought that he wouldn't have told me anyway because I mean, there's HIPAA laws. You know what I mean? He can't just
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah.
stuff with
Yeah.
patients.
That's right.
Um, but yeah, he thought it was important enough, and he's like, you should write a book. Um, and I was like, oh yeah, maybe I should.
Yeah. Was what you did he when you were recounting your experiences, did he seem surprised, or was this something that he it seemed like he had some experience with?
I don't know. I mean, the whole time I'm talking to him, he was sitting there stone. I really couldn't read
Yeah.
what he was thinking, and I honestly really didn't care. Um, but then when he kind of piped up and was like, this all sounds very interesting, and you need to do something about it. Uh, I mean, so yeah, he thought it was significant
Yeah.
and that it shouldn't be ignored, you know.
Yeah.
And he could see that I wasn't just crazy, right? Because I could sit down and kind of explain these things in the way someone who is truly schizophrenic and far gone cannot, you
Right.
know. Um, and so, he wasn't going to sign off on anything that said I was crazy for sure.
Right. You're clearly a very rational,
Yeah,
coherent person.
right. Hmm.
And did
Yeah, for
anything
sure.
come with the work of the psychologist beyond him suggesting you write a book?
No, he was like, he walked me out of his office during my last visit with him, and he shook my hand and he's like, I think you've got some important things to say, and I hope you consider writing a book. I really do.
Yeah.
Um,
And did anyone else in the government or associated with the government talk to you about your experiences?
they did. Um, I don't know how much I should say. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Well, the
there
reason I
was.
ask is I think Jim Semivan had who was senior CIA officer and was on the senior intelligence service. He talks about his experience, which he also describes as an initiatory experience, and then he reports being asked to reserve a conference room for a whole day and being briefed by people who he won't name, but
Mhm,
who essentially told him about the phenomenon.
mhm. Yeah,
And yeah, I understand if you don't want to or can't talk about that, but I was just wondering if you had a similar experience.
well, I will. There is one story that I tell some occasionally. I don't tell it that often, but I was one day talking to someone in government because I was coming across all of this stuff, right, and reading the Kabbalion, and then reading other authors associated with the Kabbalion that somehow all this had to do with God, right, and um and that in the book, in one of the books I read by a woman named Mabel Collins, she talks about how, people experiencing this stuff are like the threads through which humanity clings to the divine.
Mm,
And that to me was like, I was like, that is nonsense, right? That is just fucking nonsense. Because I was even then in the middle of it, like I was, when I'm deep in the middle of it and experiencing the deepest depression I've ever experienced in my life, and nightmares and all of that. And I talked to someone in government about this that I thought would know about it. And, this person said to me, while calmly eating some French fries when I told him about, how nonsensical this was. And I was very emotional. I was incredibly emotional.
sure.
And this person was just like, eating French fries, right? And I said, that's just such nonsense. Like, what does that mean? Threads through which humanity clings to divine. I don't view myself that way. I'm not that important, and I don't believe this, right? And he said to me, well, there's things about the universe that may seem a bit out there, but we're finding that they're quite natural, And I was like, oh my God, what the fuck does that even mean?
Yeah.
Like, so that was like a gut punch. I don't even remember the rest of the conversation, because it was like, you are taking the side of what I didn't want to hear, you know, um, because I don't believe in that. And that is not a part of my worldview. And you're kind of confirming that, yes, in fact, there's something there, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that was a conversation that I had with someone.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting because I think James Fox, who directed the documentary The Phenomenon, and also the documentary about the Varginha, Brazil incident called Moment of Contact,
Mm-hmm.
he talks about, he was going on Larry King a long time ago, and Steven Spielberg, I think he's released this letter he has released this letter publicly. That's how I know about it. He released a letter from Steven Spielberg to Larry King where he uses the exact same language, specifically calling this a natural phenomenon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's exactly how I
Yeah.
understand it today. Um, and so, like, all of the secrecy around it to me seems very ridiculous. Uh, I don't understand that. Um, Other than that, you're looking for a way to weaponize this, and that would be very bad to do that.
Yeah.
Um, I just can't even tell you how bad that would be.
Yeah. I mean, my personal view is, toward disclosure. Um, and, I think, people talk about not being, people not being able to handle that their thought projections or whatever. But I mean, like, then classify Buddhism,
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, and look. So the way I describe this today is just to say that, there's something after adulthood, some maturity level, some evolutionary psychological level to human development that lies beyond adulthood, just
Yeah.
like, infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and then there's something else. And
Hmm.
so that something else, though, is extraordinary. I mean, it's just at each one of those steps, there are, things that occur. You have massive changes in worldview, in perception. The way you perceive the world changes dramatically.
Yeah.
And so this is no different. This is just that last change,
Right.
right? And it's
And
completely natural, I would say.
yeah. Yeah. It's something we are wired for.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, 100%. And that what's so extraordinary about this last thing is that, you know, we hear from physicists, they report that, you have things like the double slit experiment, things that will seem to imply that, the mind interacts with matter at a quantum level, right? And that
Yeah.
it can interact in such a way that it changes outcomes.
Yeah.
Um, and so this last level is just a place that you reach where that becomes a lived experience,
Yeah. And it
right?
speaks to the role of the observer
Right,
in collapsing the quantum field into, um, you know, a particle field, I guess.
right,
And
right.
the
And
double slit experiment is essentially you have two slits in a sheet and you're firing electrons at, I think, a gold sheet behind that panel with two slits. And then in one version of the experiment, you have a light sensor detecting those electrons. I think they're electrons.
Hmm.
And in the other version, you do not. And in the version where you do not have a light sensor, which is just a passive sensor, it's not interfering with the electrons in any way. It's just collecting light, I think. The pattern of the electrons is that it projects onto the gold foil is a wave. And when the sensor is on, the electrons uh, project onto the gold foil as particles.
Right. 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 And there's all kinds of things that I would say about that experiment, but it does show that the observer, the conscious observation, changes the outcome, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that I would say about that is that matter will behave like solid matter. It will behave in the way that we all think it will, right? If you are at a certain psychological level, because the universe is conscious, it knows, right? And so once you start to reach other levels, that's not necessarily the case. Matter can behave like light, um, and not solid matter. And
Yeah.
so then you start to get into things like mysticism become possible, right? Your thoughts can cause some book to come your way, right? You suddenly will see it advertised before you, and oh, this is just the thing I was looking for. You know what I mean? And so you start to experience things like synchronicity, which is the lived experience of that fact,
Yeah.
right? That at the quantum level, the mind plays a role.
Yeah. And
Um,
many people, probably most people, the vast majority of people experience synchronicity
yeah, and
from
they
time
don't
to time.
recognize it. A lot of them.
Yeah.
They call it
Or they do
coincidence.
recognize it, you know?
Yeah, right, right.
Like thinking about someone and then they call you,
Yeah,
or they send you a text message or something, or you're thinking about
uh-huh.
something and then, you see a billboard for it or something. And
Right.
yeah, increasingly that could just be like a result of AI or Instagram's algorithm or something,
Oh
just
yeah,
generating synchronicities for you.
right. That I
Um,
mean,
but that's a whole other conversation.
right.
It's at some point. Well, actually, before we move on, I'm curious if you want to discuss any ways that um, that ability to mentally interact with your environment has manifested for you.
I'm very reserved about that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
that's fair.
but I mean, there are a couple of things that I um usually will talk about, and things that other people report is that you know uh, you'll come into contact with like dead people, right? And I've certainly had contact post death with various people in dreams, where they've spoken to me or said something to me, family members, uh you know and they'll tell you something that you can then wake up and Google and see, oh yes, that's a real thing and I didn't know about that,
Yeah,
and so it becomes, that kind of thing becomes undeniable at a certain point. um and I can't I will say that I cannot even it's hard to articulate how important this stuff is to the everyday person who doesn't really understand it. Um, but I mean, people should know that there are people who do know that this stuff is not bullshit, right? And
hmm
they are studying it, and they're studying it with your tax dollars. And um,
and who is studying that?
I would say the majority of it is probably in aerospace. Mhm.
Yeah,
And I'm not just saying that because I don't know that, right? I will say that I had right after I left the Navy and I had published my book, I had someone reach out to me from an aerospace company that wanted some very specific information on something.
Yeah.
Um, and and they were interviewing people that they perceived as quote unquote mystics to get this information.
Are you able
Um,
to give kind of, in some sense, the bucket that that information would fall under? What is it? Um, Material or more
I, I
psychological?
I mean, I don't really think it's not like uh central to the story. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just
Yeah.
you should be aware as the general public that people are looking into this,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And in the
there's
fact,
a great presentation by, I think I might get the name wrong, but I think it's James Ryder, gives a presentation called The Garment of God,
mhm,
where he is, and I think he was like a senior executive at Lockheed.
mhm,
And it's a very interesting lecture. If you Google Garment of God, it'll come up, and it's worth a watch.
right, right, yeah, and so I think it's just kind of just very important that people understand that um, in keeping this subject uh, in the realm of woo, right, where both of us have just explained how this is science,
Yeah.
right? And so by keeping this in the realm of woo, these people are trying to come up with ways to manipulate the situation to their own advantage, right? Which is disgusting. I'll say that right now. Um, and, and I've always thought it was disgusting. I mean, these are natural laws, right? These are natural processes, and they're keeping this from you
Yeah.
by making it some kind of giggle factor, by making it absurd, right? And it is not.
Yeah.
It's science. It is real, you know. And not only
Yeah.
that, but you know, you can look back through the pages of history and see that this was something that people used, right? There was a shaman in the village. There was a shaman in the community, right? That was the kind of spiritual leader, that the wise leader that would lead everyone, you know.
Yeah. Well, even just the essence of prayer is this, and
Right.
we think about prayer today. Everyone will just ask for, hey, help me out with this or that. I mean, that's
Hmm.
a tacit admission that your thoughts can influence your reality. But in
Yeah.
medieval times, I mean, monasteries were considered prayer factories to
Hmm.
influence events.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
And
mean these people who lived in monasteries, I can understand why they did that. I mean, I kind of view them as people who have reached this other level, right? And they know that all of this stuff is real, but they want to distance themselves from the general public, just kind of like I do. I
yeah,
want to be insulated from that because there's a lot of nonsense going on out there that uh I just want nothing to do with. You know what I
sure.
mean? And you can also see that. I'll just point out this one example. You can see this within antiquity, how you would have like the ruling class, right? And then you would have the religious class. And those would be two different classes of
Hmm.
people. And yet the religious
Across
class,
society, not just in one
yeah,
society.
yeah. And so, yeah, you'd see this all over the world. This was the case. Until recent times, this was always the case.
Hmm.
And the religious class was always the more powerful. And you kind of have to wonder why, like, because the leader in the ruling class ruled by divine right. And why is that? And why would someone who is like a totalitarian or a dictator allow this whole other wing of equal or more powerful than I am to exist? Right? It wouldn't happen today unless there was something to that. right? If you could, and you got to imagine if you're a dictator, or you're a pharaoh or whatever, or you're in this line of succession for something, and you wake up in your bed one night paralyzed, and the local head priest is at your bedside telling you something, and then he like vanishes into a puff of smoke, right? And then the next day you go and visit him, and he tells you everything that he had told you the night before, and it wasn't just a dream. He was at your bedside, and he had you paralyzed, and he could have done whatever he wanted with you. Suddenly then, as the ruling class, you realize there's something here that I don't understand, and these people have control over powers that are way beyond me.
Yeah.
And um and I'm
And
not
when
going
do
to
you think
mess
that
with it.
division started breaking down?
Well, you see it in various civilizations, like uh Akhenaten, for instance, in Egypt, right? You can see that clearly there was some kind of breakdown in the religious class, in that you probably didn't have the adepts that could do some of the more powerful things, and so it kind of degraded and became nonsensical. And then Akhenaten comes along and has this experience of awakening, and decides he's going to totally transform the civilization, right? And the religious class did not like that.
Yeah.
um, and so there was all of this turmoil there with that. And then there was King Tut, and he kind of restored things. So there are various places you can look in history where you could see the religious class was waning,
Yeah.
and so the ruling class kind of took over. Um, and you see that with religions that have died too. And I tell people all the time, we look at these religions in the old world, and we automatically assume that they're nonsense, because in the time that we live today, we have Christianity right here in the United States, and it's dying. It's a
Yeah.
dying religion. It can no longer connect you to anything real. And so it's nonsensical. It doesn't mean anything. And so that's how we look at all these religions of the past. And that's just
Right.
not the case.
And
It's not the
we
case.
also see this country was founded on a principle of separation between church and state, and clearly a very overt breakdown in
Hmm.
that separation today. But going back to the early Middle Ages, you also see a breakdown where the Catholic Church at the time was very political and selected, got into power politics,
Hmm.
and I think that going back to definitely the Merovingians, and possibly before that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting to kind of take this lens and look at history through it. And things just, I mean, to me, when you look at history through this lens, things start to become clear. You can see this,
Yeah,
right? This fact.
totally.
Um,
As you're saying this, I'm thinking, and we're talking about the separation of church and state here. I think this nation was many of the founding fathers were Freemasons,
mhm,
and founded the Constitution in the country on Masonic principles. And then I think one of the lineages of Freemasonry goes back to the builders of the cathedrals in medieval
mhm,
Europe, which we were talking about prayer factories, and the cathedrals were built. Um, One of the purposes of the cathedrals was to raise the consciousness of medieval Europe. And then you have this broad period of building these monumental cathedrals,
mhm.
unlike anything that Europe's seen. And then uh, shortly after, you have the Renaissance.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can totally see the line that goes through that. I mean, because you got to think about, what does a cathedral represent? And you look at kind of, like, you take Notre Dame, right? It's got gargoyles and stuff like that on the outside, things that maybe aren't as pleasant or appealing. But then you go inside, and there's this vast space inside.
Yeah.
that's very well lit, and there's all this color, and it's beautiful, you know.
Yeah, and very precisely architected
Yeah, and so
in terms of like its acoustics. If you look at the vaulted ceilings, I mean,
oh yeah,
it looks very intentional.
right. And so what does that represent? That represents going inside, right? The inner as opposed to the outer.
Yeah, and
And the
yeah,
fact
altered
that when
states of
you
consciousness, achieving
yeah,
altered states of consciousness through vibration, harmonics,
yeah, exactly.
music.
Hmm. Yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, at some point, I think post initiation, you were transported. I think you say through a tunnel of light.
hmm. Yeah,
Where
where what now?
where did you go?
I don't know where that was, but it was very interesting. I mean, I'm still kind of discovering things about my experiences. Uh, I went into like what I would describe as like a medical situation.
Yeah.
I was like something grabbed me in my bed from behind and said, "Hold on," and so I kind of held on, and it said, "Close your eyes," and I didn't. And so I was just instantly in this like tunnel of light, and it was very kind of um discombobulating, I guess. So I wake up, I lost consciousness, and then I wake up and I'm in this bed, um, in an environment that does not seem at all familiar to me. It was very uh I guess like the color would be like copperish. Um
Yeah.
and there was like light in the bed, which was kind of nonsensical, and then the floor was like black. It was like the blackest black I've ever seen.
Huh.
And I got up out of this bed, and I saw this thing next to the bed kind of protruding from the wall that was like layered, and then it had a dome on the top of it. And I had assumed that that was some kind of light or whatever, but and the other day I was looking at quantum computers, and you could see how they're like these layered it has like this layered structure
Yeah.
of several different layers, and I was like, that looks like what I saw, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And
It's
not only
interesting you say that. Yeah, because
that
I've
layering went around the room, so the whole room was like a quantum computer in
yeah.
my mind, which is weird, you know.
Yeah, I've had on ayahuasca, I've had similar experience where you go to a space that's like this. At the time, I thought about it as like this cosmic clock type thing, but when I saw a picture of a quantum computer, I was like, oh, it
Yeah,
looks super similar.
right. Yeah, it's kind of strange how that works, you know.
Yeah, it is. And what happened while you were there?
Um, I woke up in this room. I looked at that lamp thing, and I saw that there were smaller versions of that around the room also. Uh and so I get up and I put my feet on the floor, and I'm assuming it's going to be cold, right? But it wasn't. And there were two doors on either side. So I start walking towards one of the doors, and then that was the last thing I remembered. I I woke up later in my own bed. So
Yeah. Wow.
um I don't know what
And
happened.
you've never done any kind of hypnotic regression or anything like that, right?
No.
Yeah.
Mm-mm,
Do you have any
no.
interest in doing that?
I don't, because I I feel like a lot of I don't know. I've watched one of the things about hypnotic regression is that I have watched videos of people who've done this, and it's almost like there's a certain narrative that comes out of that,
Mm.
and it's a narrative that I don't think fits. You know, like for instance, I saw one guy undergoing hypnotic regression, and he's talking about how, oh, they want our DNA, like, to fix their own DNA,
Mm.
which is just, it's nonsensical, right? That idea. And I would say that just based on the technology that we have now, we have CRISPR technology now,
Yeah.
right? Where you
Yeah.
can just mix and match DNA. You don't need any reparative DNA, you know?
Yeah. Well, it seems like in a lot of experiences, yours included, these beings are doing things that they're interacting at a level of overtness and bluntness that you would think they would not have to, given the scale of their technology.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that was, so when I said that I was thinking about other things as well, when I was thinking about that light show and the fact that it goes back, one of the other things that I was thinking about is like, so there are people who have this theory that, you know, these things are just here to torture us. They're, you know, maybe less evolved than we are, and they're
Yeah.
feeding on us. But
Feeding on our negative emotions or whatever.
and I'll say this about that. So I kind of looked at, you know, if you could place kind of psychologically where people are on a bell curve of human behavior, right? In terms of someone who would get a kick out of torturing someone in this way, and then on the other end of that, like the most altruistic, kind of purist, loving person
Yeah.
that would ever exist, right? And because I realized that's not how I would get my kicks, right? I would
Right.
never do this to another living animal, right? It's just not what I would do for fun.
Yeah.
It's not fun. Uh, so I started to think about like who are those people that would get fun out of this? And you look at that, and you have to kind of look at the lower end of the human bell curve and see that maybe people in prison, right? Maybe that's why they're in prison, is they get
Sadists.
kicks. Yeah, they get kicks out of something like this. And and so you would have to believe that you have this civilization of people who are sadists, and the kind of people that we put in prison, and somehow they've developed this extraordinary, exotic, high technology. Um, and I don't see anyone in prison inventing anti-gravitic technology to get out of there, right? So,
Yeah. Well, you never know. I mean, there's some interesting people in prison. There just may be.
right.
Um,
And so
but
I don't see that, right?
yeah. But
Um,
if there were um, people with violent dispositions, as our societies are, we are, our nations and we as humans go to war and kill each other. If you have that level of capability, as we now have with nuclear weapons,
mhm.
um, at some point, you probably destroy yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's why I view that as kind of like an evolutionary impossibility, that you could have a civilization
Yeah.
that is, it's stable enough that from our perspective they've been around doing this same thing for thousands of years,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
there's something within their civilization that has continued for thousands of years, whereas we have seen civilization collapse after collapse after collapse, and and they've experienced none of that,
Yeah.
right? Which,
Yeah. Well, and you've also talked about the required brain chemistry
mhm,
to achieve um, states where you have access to a higher consciousness. And I think you've spoken about um, anger disrupting that connection.
yeah, yeah. I mean, if you're someone, so I talked about that state I was able to maintain
Yeah.
for an extended period of time. And if you're someone whose mind is not at ease, right? In other words, if you live your life from one emotion to the next, without doing anything to kind of control those or to rid those out of your mind, then you're not going to be in a state, psychologically, you won't be in a stable enough state to begin interacting with this higher consciousness, because it is much more stable than that.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of like, the way I describe it is, it's like tuning a radio. Right. And if you're not on the right if you're not on the same frequency, you're not going to hear it.
Yeah.
Right. And hence why most people don't experience this stuff,
Yeah.
because you're not there mentally, psychologically, you're not there.
Yeah.
And so that's why integrating trauma is so important, because people can be traumatized by anything. You can be traumatized by the guy who flips you off in the supermarket parking lot, and that can ruin your day, right? And you can be angry about that for the rest, several days even.
Yeah.
And so anything can throw you out of that mindset if you let it. Um,
Yeah. And going through day-to-day life, you will have no shortage of anyone will have no shortage of reasons to encountering things that could throw you out of that
right.
state of mind.
Right.
And
And so, but I will say, I'm talking from experience here, right?
yeah,
That's not something that that I've just inferred out of something. I know this to be true, because I know what state I'm in when certain things happen, right?
right.
And I know that in an extended period of time, in keeping that state, even more will happen, right? So
Yeah.
it's not me not stating this out of experience. I want to make that clear.
No, and you talk about this. So in that kind of post initiation bliss period where you are just completely at peace, in a way that is temporary, you talk about being able to see universal forces impacting people and affecting their emotions.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you can, and you talk about to me, they seemed like almost like environmental forces, like a current or a wind.
Yeah.
And so can you talk about that versus beings and the phenomenon, and kind of how people are viewing, uh, I feel like there can be a conflation between those forces and something feeding off your negative emotion or intentionally trying to just ruin your day or your life or
Right. Well, I've got a couple of things to say about that. I and I'll start off with this. So, there's, like you said, this other theory that these are entities that feed off of our negative emotions, but
Mhm.
I don't see it that way. What I perceive is that they come around when your brain becomes, plasticity is increased, right? And when plasticity is increased in the brain, that to you as a lived experience, that means depression,
Yeah.
right? And so that's when they realize that they can affect the most change in you. And that's why they come around. And that's what I perceive.
Mm.
Right. And I will say that in order to be on this level, right, where you're psychologically free of all of these things, your thoughts and your actions really are altruistic. And if you have a thought to the contrary, you're immediately thrown out of that. You don't have access to it anymore.
Can you say that again?
I said you're immediately thrown out of that kind of connection,
If
right?
what?
If you have a thought that is not altruistic or in keeping with that higher level of thought,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If it's not, if it's a thought that isn't in keeping with creation, right? Otherwise, it'd be chaos everywhere.
Right.
The universe would be chaos.
Right. I think a kid in the telepathy tapes, said something like that. Like if I weren't a good person, I wouldn't have access
Yeah.
to this ability.
Yeah. And so if you're encountering something that's speaking to you telepathically, they're speaking to you through that higher level, right? And they would not have access to that if they were there to hurt you, right? But I will say that there are, and people look at this initiatory process and they think about how difficult it is and how, awful it is and the awful things that they put you through and things like that. But, if you're correcting one of your children, right, you're not doing that necessarily out of anger and out of want to injure them.
Yeah.
Right. You might smack them across the ass because they need to understand that you don't walk out in the middle of the road,
Yeah. But even that is that's a punitive dynamic. I mean, you can even think of it as a more constructive dynamic where you have a coach who's taking you through like a killer practice or something.
Yeah.
And that is making you better. And to your
Right.
point, if you have like a very soft coach, you're not going to go anywhere.
Right. Yeah. And so if you don't have that kind of, if that isn't your end goal and the reason why you're doing this, then, and if you're doing it out of anger and spite and to feed off of someone's negative emotions, you don't have access to that higher level. You will immediately be shut out of it. And I know that for a fact. That's not a debate with me. And the second part of that I will say is that these same people, right, that hold to this theory that all of this is evil and that it's just feeding off of your emotions and it's satanic. To those people, I would ask them, what is advertising? I mean, advertising, we do this we feed off of each other's emotions and turn that into money every day, all day long through advertising.
Yeah.
I was watching a commercial the other day where it was like, oh, my father, we have this close bond going back to childhood. He was always so wonderful and all of this other stuff. And now buy this bathtub. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
And it's like, how do you not see that we're doing that to each other all day, every day?
Have you listened to the music on the nightly news?
Yeah.
I mean, it'll give you heart palpitations.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if you,
and that's that is
right,
how we're supposed to understand that's where we get information about our world.
Right. Yeah. And if you don't see that we're doing this to each other every day, all day long, and you don't have a problem with that, but somehow you have a problem with others doing this, I don't know, where are your priorities, I would say to them, because who does more of that, us or them? Right. We're clearly doing much more of that to ourselves than they would do. So,
well, if you listen to Tom DeLonge, I think he's said, I don't think I'm misquoting here, he has said that these beings have intentionally divided the world's religions and keep humanity in a state of war.
No, I don't buy that either. Because here's the thing. So religions start off with this truth, right? They start off with this truth of an initiatory process that you can enter into, a death and a resurrection, right? And they kind of put you through that, and you have ritual elders that help with that. But they gradually they can degrade over time, and so thousands of years later, it may resemble nothing like that, just like Christianity does today. And so it becomes nonsense. And you got to remember that religions are developed by people, right? People wrote those books. People wrote the Bible. People write these stories. It's not them writing it, right? They're going to continue doing what they're doing and putting people through this process, and they'll either get it or they won't.
And even if you accept that there are religious scriptures that are divinely inspired and they're the valid word of God, the religions that steward those books still become highly politicized organizations.
Yeah, right.
And couched in dogma. And that's not aberrant behavior for humans. You see that tendency everywhere.
Right. Yeah. And so religion degrades into nothing more than this vehicle that feeds on your emotions, basically, is what it's doing.
Yeah.
And so because the process has become so corrupted,
Yeah.
you know.
I had a quick, well, okay. Um, Danny Sheehan tells a story about that I think was relayed to him by someone who says he spoke to an entity at a military facility and asked him, he said that there was like a Galactic Federation or something, which is something that is um, been suggested elsewhere. I think Haim Shed, who was the head of Israel's Space Command, said that back in 2020, and there's an article, NBC News picked up that story and wrote about it, that there's a Galactic Federation. This guy asked uh, the entity that he says he was talking to, who's in charge of the Federation, and the answer is God, but it's not what you think. And so I'm wondering, what is your conception of God, if you have one?
I
And
guess
what do you make of that statement, I guess, as well?
right. My conception of God is probably just that God is everything. Um but that being said, God is also the good and the bad. Right. And so the idea is that you stop putting things in buckets of good and bad, and
Mhm.
just view life as an experience one way or the other, and it's not good or bad.
Yeah.
Don't put things in those buckets. And don't avoid the bad either. Like, learn from both equally. That's what you really have to do, and turn those bad into something meaningful.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is not to say that you go around doing bad things or that you
Right.
approve of people doing bad things.
Right. Exactly. But I think that we can't dismiss the fact that those are the things that often will make you a better person. The worst things that happen to you are generally the best things for you,
Mm-hmm.
depending on your personality. I mean, and how you integrate trauma. But so in terms of, like, is there a galactic federation? I don't know. I mean,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I could see how if you're connected to this stuff, you don't necessarily need like a centralized government. I could see that. Um, and you don't need any kind of central organization, because that is just naturally there.
Yeah.
Um,
Because you were just so completely interfaced with the natural order of things and the natural
right.
structure of the universe.
Yeah. And so since you're plugged into that, that is what governs you naturally. You
Yeah.
don't need a person telling you, um, oh, this is our government, and this is who you're going to follow, because you can follow the natural order of the universe.
Right.
And so that's kind of my conception of God, is connecting to that kind of universal thing, and that is
Yeah.
what God is, and God is everything, the only thing there is. So he's like my cell phone, he's this computer,
Yeah.
he's you, he's me.
I think the best phrase I've ever heard for God is the great reality.
Yeah, right. And so this is what Jesus is talking about, like welcoming foreigners as though, they are you, because they are, right?
Yeah.
Um, there is no separation there. I don't care if you're a billionaire or if you're white or whatever, and you don't. I mean, to shun someone else is to shun God, right?
Yeah.
Because God is everyone and everything. So I've personally, I just like Jesus probably would. I view this whole treatment of foreigners today as kind of an abomination. It
Right.
really is awful. It is, and I don't know what that means for you, to be
Well, I
honest.
sent you that video of
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. GOP Jesus. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, kind of, I guess going deeper into just the structure of kind of the mystery schools and the phenomenon's interaction with people over time. You talked about the importance of artifacts and children sentenced to death for stealing artifacts
Mhm.
um, from the Eleusinian mysteries. And then you also relate that, I believe, to the Knights Templars, to Nazis, and then to crash retrievals as well,
Yeah.
which I thought was very interesting.
Well, I mean, I don't think I'm the only one who draws that line between uh true religious artifacts um and other things. I mean, so if we're to believe some people's statements, they will say that if you are if you're an experiencer, right, or you're someone who's experienced the phenomenon and you have a piece of a craft put in your hand, that you will react with that. Like you
Right.
will have some reaction with it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you put it in someone else's hand, it's a piece of metal. It's a hunk of metal. It doesn't mean anything. There's nothing to it. Um, and so I kind of believe that in antiquity they had things, pieces of things perhaps that people would interact with, and that you would then have some kind of experience with that piece of something. So I say this based on the fact that just looking at the Eleusinian mysteries, there was one ritual where the initiates would go into the telesteron like one at a time, and it was said that there was something that was in a basket, and
Mm,
they would take the item out of the basket and they would operate it, and then they would put it back in the basket and leave the room, and the next one would come in, right? And so what was that? And it would seem to me that it would be very easy to have some kind of a piece of a wreck, maybe, or something,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that you would hold this thing in your hand and you would have a reaction to it,
Yeah.
right? And
Well, a number of
so,
people talk about holding anomalous material in their hands that's associated with UFOs
yeah,
and feeling a current
yeah,
from that material.
right. And so this also may very well have been a test, right, to see where the initiates are,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you'd go through this ceremony, and then on the other end of that, you would come out and you would recite how you know, entered the room, you took the thing out of the basket, you put it in your hand, you operated it, and then put it back in you would repeat that to the priest or whoever was there.
Yeah.
Um, and so obviously if you had some kind of reaction with this, that would come up,
Mm-hmm.
right? That would come up at this time. And so it would become obvious, well, who's ready for this and who's not, you know?
Yeah.
Or maybe who's ready for this naturally and who's ready for this with you're going to need a little bit of extra help. Maybe we'll give you the psychedelics,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Oh,
So
that's interesting.
yeah.
That's very
Hmm.
interesting. And so how do you think that I assume you think those yeah, well, I think we both heard that those artifacts are used to test people today. How does that um play a role in society at large? Because I'm thinking that, we're talking about the mystery schools and there was, you know, total secrecy to outsiders about what happened within the mystery schools. They were secret
Right.
societies. Um, and we're also talking about, well, there should be disclosure, but there's not. There's tremendous secrecy
Mm.
around this phenomenon with our government. And I'm wondering what's kind of the common thread there.
I mean, I don't know that they're. I think the common thread is just that I didn't know that what happened to me was incredibly rare. In that And I kind of articulate this stuff in a way that I'm not really seeing other people doing, you
Yeah.
know, because they don't know. Um, and that to me is a little disturbing. And I feel like, um, I feel like because I articulate these things in this way, I can help the everyday person to kind of make sense of this and what's happening. Um, I got that phone going on. Okay, sorry about that.
No, no problem.
So I talk about this stuff in a way that the everyday person can kind of make sense of it and understand it as a natural thing.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in antiquity there was no way to do that, right? In antiquity it was kind of like it was witchcraft, right? And it could make people very uncomfortable if you could do things that they thought was unnatural, you know. And I've certainly experienced that. I've I've had people contact me after reading my book and having these experiences and being in the middle of it, and they'll reach out to me and I'll be on the phone with them and they'll ask me questions like, are you human? One guy asked me, he was like, what are you?
Yeah. Yeah.
and and so those kinds of things, when you encounter someone like me and you start to have these anomalous experiences yourself, we can explain that through science today, but in the past you couldn't do that,
Hmm.
right? And so you could be considered something evil, some kind of evil force, and so there was a lot of misinterpretation that would happen there. But I also think that there's a lot of misinterpretation happening within government at various levels of government today,
Sure.
right? In that you see these things happening, right? And nobody really has the full story and nobody can articulate things that I'm articulating, right? And kind of lay it out for you how this is scientific fact, how those things fit together. And so it still seems like superstition to you. And you want to put it within the context of that, what you know, right? And religion, and that there's God and the devil, right? And because this is what you've always been taught. And so now it was always kind of a belief before, but now here you are encountering it with UFOs and otherworldly things.
Yeah. Or it's just seen as evil.
Yeah. hmm Yeah, and it can be seen as evil because you're taken way outside your comfort zone with this stuff
Hmm.
for sure.
Hmm.
Um, and certainly people you encounter that may know something about this may seem evil to you because in their presence things happen,
Yeah.
right? That make you uncomfortable and make you question your worldview. Uh, and so you may not be good at integrating trauma, and so you automatically project that onto something, this idea of evil, right?
Right.
Which is nonsensical.
Yeah. So I guess you've suggested that these beings are our progenitors, I think. And there are a lot of theories out there about what they might be: future humans, breakaway civilizations, extraterrestrials, interdimensional beings, ultra terrestrials, crypto terrestrials, AI. I think you even suggested that talking about Travis Walton's story, when he encounters kind of the human looking being in the blue suit, you suggested that that might be an initiate of ages past.
hmm
And so I'm wondering, and it's potentially there's no single answer, maybe there are multiple answers, but I'm wondering what's kind of your uh, taxonomy or ontology for what the phenomenon is, if you're even able to speculate about that.
I am kind of I do speculate about things, and this is kind of speculation, but it's also kind of based on something real in that, you come to understand that there's no such thing as death, right? And you have to then look at studies that have been done, like at the University of Virginia, where they've looked into
Hmm.
people who like strong cases for reincarnation,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah. They have a long running study where
yeah.
young children will report very detailed
Mhm.
experience that seem to be from past lives. So they have recorded thousands of these instances, and in thousands of those instances, they have actually attributed the exact person that the children are describing. And I think that's talked about in a Netflix documentary, I think called
Mhm.
"Surviving Death."
Yeah, I
I
think
could be
so.
wrong about that,
Yeah, I think you're
but
right.
these are not, it's not like, oh, I was Cleopatra climbing the pyramids or something. These are everyday people, oftentimes with social security numbers,
Yeah,
and well documented lives.
right. Yeah. Yeah, and things that would not have been known outside of that person's life. Like I think there was one instance where this kid claimed to be this guy, right, who lived um his life kind of the majority of it in the early 1900s into maybe the 50s. I think he died in the 60s maybe, or something like that. But anyway, like he had given his daughter a dog, and he this kid is recalling this story about how, my daughter hated that dog back in like the 30s or something like that.
Yeah.
And the woman was still alive, an old lady. And so they asked her about this, and she was like, "Yeah, I did. I hated that dog, you know." And like, how would this kid have known that? Right? There's no way this kid would have known that. It's not like something that would have been online. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because why would that be online? I mean, so there's all kinds of cases of this, and so my kind of take on this is, and in reading the totality of kind of literature about this stuff, what I see is that, in terms of Greek myth, they always say the hero is always placed in the sky by the gods, right? um and or the hero always goes to dwell with the gods on Olympus, you
Hmm.
know
Hmm.
Um, and so my thought is that once you go through this process, probably enough times, that it becomes instinctual, right? And you got to realize this is an evolution, so it takes a long
Yeah.
time. So you may go through this awakening process, I would assume, several times here, where you're
Several times within one life or several times over the course of many lives.
did many lives, right? Until it becomes kind of instinctual that you will just do this,
Hmm.
right? And so my belief is that once you reach a certain point that it becomes instinctual enough, they'll take you, right? In other words, like, you're not going back there. You're going to come with us now.
Hmm.
Um, and so, because they don't have to deal with the fact that you wouldn't understand how to get to this next level, right? You'll
Right.
do that instinctually as you grow up with them, because you know how to do that now.
Right. And that sort of reflects, I forget where this is, but there's, you know, a myth where the cycle of reincarnation stops when when you die, your heart is put on a scale with a feather.
Mhm.
And when your heart is, I think, equal to or lighter than the feather, then you're ready to move on.
Right. Yeah, but that story really, that's an Egyptian story, and
Okay.
it's in the Book of the Dead, right? The weighing of the heart, and there's Colonel Carl Nell talks about how these Egyptian um documents, it's actually the largest it's the largest stockpile of religious documents in the world,
Yeah.
the
And
pyramid
you just
text.
held a Twitter space on this,
I
and
did.
it's great. I don't remember you talking about the feather and the heart. So
Yeah,
if you
so
did talk about that, I apologize for ripping you off here.
no, I didn't talk about that, but I'm
Okay.
glad you bring it up, because basically that's what's happening within initiation, right?
Yeah.
Is your heart weighed down with heavy emotions, like you've just been through the worst thing in your life? Or is it light in that you were able to integrate this stuff and move on, and everything's wonderful, you know, no matter how bad it was, you learn from it and you're better off for it. And so it was a wonderful experience. And that's what the weighing of the heart ultimately is about. Is
Yeah.
your heart heavy with emotion or not?
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's whatever happens to you in life, everyone suffers in life. Does your heart maintain that lightness or
Yeah.
achieve that lightness?
Hmm. Yeah. And so that's kind of, and Carl Nell, I don't know how, if you want me to get into this or not, how
Yeah,
Carl
no,
Nell described
100%. Yeah, please.
that because we interpret religion through a kind of materialistic lens, we, in the early, in the 19th century, we started with Egyptology, looking at the Egyptian religion through a materialistic lens, because that's the way we view religion, because we're living in a time when religion is dying and it doesn't connect you to anything. And so with that materialistic lens, they viewed all of these documents as funerary, right? That they would take
Right.
place during someone's funeral, and not, but he also states that there's another interpretation of that, in that they are incredibly esoteric. And so these were rites that people could proceed through and experience and be initiated into within their lifetime, right? And so that's where the weighing of the heart comes in, right? You
Yeah.
can see that in Egypt, their mysteries were in full vigor at one point. And I I post about this, and I think people think I'm crazy, because I posted recently about the Opet festival in Egypt, and how the Egyptian government kind of recreated this with this procession that would happen around the time of the autumnal equinox, and it was between um, Karnak and Luxor, you know.
Yeah.
And it was the beginning of their mysteries. It was the parade that kicked that off, and it was down the avenue of the Sphinxes, right? The Sphinxes on either side of you, all the way down this avenue. That, again, the master of animals motif.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and
And
so I posted that video, how they recreated this, and they actually are doing it every year at the same time. So they not only have they recreated it in video form for people to watch, but as a tourist, you can go there and observe this, just as people did in ancient times.
yeah. And do lay people know what this parade is for, or is that only um initiates
Um,
or candidates for initiation? You know that?
you mean in ancient Egypt?
Yeah.
So the parade, I find this interesting. The people who were encouraged to participate were people in the military, people within government, um, people in the religious ruling class. Um, so those types of people were encouraged to participate. It wasn't necessarily everyone that was invited,
Hmm.
Though those
Hmm.
were the big people that they chose from to participate in the mysteries. And
Yeah.
and we see that today, right, with the military. A lot of people in the military end up having these types of experiences, and within the intelligence community, because those kind of careers kind of lend themselves to aligning with the correct psychology that will get you there.
Right.
Um,
Which is what? Order and discipline.
Order, discipline, very minimalistic. Um, not afraid to get after the weak points, not only in others but in yourself.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and a kind of insistence upon attention to detail and perfection. Um, so yeah, I think those things are just bred into those institutions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think Mabel Collins wrote a book. I forget what it was called, but I heard about it from you, uh, and I read it about a boy who goes to, like a peasant boy who goes to
Mhm.
work in a temple, and first they put him in is it Light on the Path? No,
No, it's called Idol of the White Lotus.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
by Mabel Collins. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I would love to see that made into a movie, maybe even a kids movie, because I
Yeah.
think that kids need this stuff too, because as I said, this is not just about that's why there's so many of these types of fantasy movies that have to do with this stuff that are also geared towards children, because everyone goes through psychological changes and they're initiatory, and these shifts in perception and worldview and stuff like that. And so kids have these stories too, just like one of my favorites, The Dark Crystal, when I was a
Yeah.
kid. That
I
was a
was going to say,
wonderful
I
movie.
think the Idyll of the White Lotus would be about as kid friendly as that movie.
or like The Never Ending Story. That was a good one too when I
Yeah.
was a kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so
I hated that
yeah,
movie as a kid.
really.
I thought it was so boring.
Oh wow, I loved it.
Yeah. I
I
like it
loved
now, but yeah,
it.
at the time I was not a fan.
Yeah, and so I think that so that story is like an initiatory story, right?
Yeah.
And she says that she channeled that, and that was a true story of an Egyptian priest at a time when um, the religion within Egypt was kind of falling apart and dying, because it could no longer connect people with the truth,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And that's why it's called Idol of the White Lotus, right? Because this boy, he sees this goddess on a lotus tank and has a conversation with her, and then recalls that with some temple priests, and they're like, oh my god, no one's seen her in like 100
Right.
years, and here you are talking to her,
Yeah.
you know
Which
um
is kind of like the lady that some people say, or kind of Marian apparitions that people report. Do you think it's similar to that? Is that where
I don't
that
know.
comes
I mean,
from?
I a lot of people have placed some kind of emphasis on this lady,
Hmm.
and I don't see an emphasis there. I think that the reason people tend to put a lot of weight on that is because they don't really understand um the symbolism of that, and they don't understand like the male and female mind and male and female energy.
Yeah.
But what I'll say about that is that it's very simple, right? It's not that complicated. A lot of people want to put all of this window dressing around male and female energy like it's something it's not. So if you're female, right, typically the male energy is that it's just that aspect of yourself that you are not, right?
Yeah.
It's that the male energy would be the hole uh within you that you have to fill,
Yeah.
and become whole yourself,
Yeah.
right? And
Well,
so
I think that's right, but I think there are kind of um, you know maybe two primary patterns at play here. One is the kind of individual path of personal initiation, right? Of individual initiation, and then there's kind of the long arc of the development of humanity.
mhm,
And so I wonder if the lady, which I agree with you, it's you know representative of something, of an underlying phenomenological reality, right? But what does that say? Because you talk about this, you talk about flaps in human history, right? And so what do these moments of appearance or apparition suggest about our current time or where we're going? Or
I think once again that people like to, like, there are a lot of people who report, oh, that this is the end times. Like, everybody wants to think that we're the last generation to
yeah,
go through this, and
yeah,
I just
right.
don't see it
Everyone
that way.
thinks that apocalypse, that the book of Revelation is right around the corner.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I tell people is that revelation is something that's always been happening.
Hmm.
Right. It's the initiatory process. It's always been happening. It will continue to happen. It's never going to be everybody all at once, because it can only be affected on an individual level. Right.
That's right. That's right. But I think we also conflate a global apocalypse with like a total apocalypse or something. But if you talk to people going through World War II or any of the many kind of world crisis or more regional kind of all-consuming crises that humans have gone through throughout, that's basically the story of human history, right? Or these moments of periodic crisis. I think that those people would describe those being in the midst of that as an apocalypse in many
Hmm.
ways.
I think yeah, for sure. But I also believe that, like, there's no accidents, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
In that if you're if and I really do believe this, that I think in antiquity, when people were holding the mysteries, that wasn't just to get initiates through and stabilize civilization. I think that what happens is it also stabilizes civilization, in that there isn't necessarily a need for apocalyptic things to happen, because
Mm.
you're already shepherding people through this. And
Hmm.
so it's almost a way to avoid really bad things from happening, right? Because either really bad things are going to happen, which is going to shock people into this,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Or you can just use it as a way to avoid really bad things happening and stabilize civilization.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
it does.
Like
But
there's no need for catastrophe to push you into this,
yeah,
because you're doing it anyway.
but there was
You know?
also no shortage of a catastrophe, I think, at the time that the Eleusinian mysteries were existent.
I don't know. I mean, it depends, because I think that these things existed also, as nonsense, right? Like I said, they gradually degrade. And so you may have had like 1,000
Right.
years where you're doing it and you're
Right.
actually doing it. But then you're going to reach some point where it just degrades into nonsense, and
Hmm.
and it doesn't do that anymore. Otherwise, it would still be around, right?
Yeah, but I think you have contemporary figures, like Plato and Aristotle, who go through the mysteries. And I think Aristotle was Alexander the Great's teacher, wasn't he?
Yeah. Hmm.
And so, I mean, Alexander the Great plowed across the ancient world.
Yeah.
That would have been a period of total war and catastrophe for a lot of people.
Yes. Yeah. Probably. I mean, but I don't.
And again, it's, I think, important just to frame that apocalypse is not just um, catastrophe.
Mhm.
It's revelation, right?
Right.
It drives things forward,
Right. Hmm.
and it does so in a similar way to personal initiation, where there is a breakdown. It's preceded by a breakdown.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that I think that either you do these mysteries, right, and you stabilize civilization, or you don't. And I think that that's why you had civilizations like the Greeks and the Romans and others that lasted for several thousand years. The Egyptians, certainly, probably the longest.
Yeah.
Um, and the reason for that was the mysteries, for sure, hands down, no question about it in my mind. Because without that, you have no stabilization of civilization.
Right.
Um, because you got to imagine if you were in like a small um group of humans, early humans, right, and you had a shaman that was among you,
Yeah.
and he was your guide, right? He would tell you where you're going to find food. He would tell you how to make tools to kill food. He would guide you through everything. And imagine that he didn't see any among his people that could take his place, right? And so then he dies. And then you could see how, well, now we don't know where to find food anymore. We don't know how to do all of these things. He's taught us a little bit, but not really. And so you kind of start to have chaos that consumes even just a small group of people.
Yeah.
And so on a larger scale, in terms of the United States, I don't see that any differently. There's a dearth of people
Yeah.
who are able to guide us in any meaningful way, um, either spiritually or academically, or just to be our wisest voices, calling out to us through all of this darkness on the internet, and all of this darkness that is happening,
Yeah.
and appealing to our better judgment,
Where do you see the ideals or uh knowledge of the mysteries today?
Where do I see that?
Yeah.
You mean in terms of like how many people are aware of it?
Sure. Yeah, but also what sources of that wisdom or knowledge, or I guess you use the term leadership, um can people turn to today?
Oh, I don't know. I don't really see much.
Yeah.
I mean, you had it always seems like, um at times when things are at their worst, there's always some leader that pops up that just seems to be the right thing at the right time, you know, to keep things going. And I maybe we'll have that, maybe we won't. I don't know.
Yeah.
But uh I mean that's what the mysteries would produce, is people like that. Um and philosophers and artists uh and we don't have those things. This is it. There's so much that's wrong with, I think, modernity and living in a postmodern world, that things aren't beautiful anymore.
Hmm.
uh you know they aren't kept because they're not beautiful. um they aren't maintained. We just live in a throwaway society, and it's becoming more and more disposable, so much so that human life is just so disposable to us that we don't care. And I think when you reach a situation like that, um, it's only a matter of time before things really go south. You know. Um,
Yeah. Well, I think most people feel that in the air today. They feel things falling apart. Uh, Either we are in crisis or on the edge of crisis, and clearly living in a world of disorder. Um, to me, I think so. But I remain optimistic, and I believe that we will come through this period better than we went into it. I'm wondering, what's your take? You've written about this and to some extent.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm optimistic in that I think things always will eventually end up better, but I think that there's a lot of work between now and then,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's just how willing are we to do that work? How long will it take us based on how willing we are?
Yeah.
And so how long is the pain going to last? I think that's up to us.
And I think you would say that disclosure of the UFO phenomenon, if I can use that term, is an essential part of that.
I do think so, yeah. I say that um based on the fact that like so you and I had this discussion today, um and I've had a lot of people in the academic world that have reached out to me, that have wanted me to speak at universities or to speak to certain aspects of this that uh I view to be valid and relevant. And so that without disclosure, right, without people beginning to take this seriously, there wouldn't be any of that, right? Academia would not be engaging with me,
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't be having these discussions, these deep discussions, these philosophical discussions,
Yeah.
that need to be had concerning, where are we going, what is all this, because otherwise I think those conversations become politically charged, right? And so I think if you can take that political charge out of it and kind of really just get down to the bare bones of it in terms of disclosure and what that's telling us and what people have learned in their experiences and what wisdom have they gleaned that can help the world. I think that that's a wonderful discussion to be had,
Mm-hmm.
and we need it now. We need it bad. Probably
Yeah.
more than ever within the United States, certainly.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, there's a reason that people in academia are willing to reach out to you, and others to speak about the subject. And I think it all traces back to the New York Times article in 2017 and everything that's unfolded since then with the UAP task force and Arrow and all the hearings in Congress and proposed legislation in Congress. And now the documentary, The Age of Disclosure, has come out, and um, I think that is changing a lot of people's minds about this subject, or kind of taking them down the rabbit hole.
uh
I know a lot of people in my life who have no interest in the subject have seen that documentary, and are now uh, their interest is piqued.
right.
Um, and I'm wondering, did you saw the documentary?
I did, yeah. Hmm.
What did you think about it?
I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah.
I loved it. I I can't sing its praises enough. I mean, I think that it takes a lot of bravery to go out there, and say some of these things, especially considering the positions a lot of these people held, right? They have everything to lose and nothing to gain
Mhm.
in saying this.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it was wonderful for starting kind of a more serious national discussion on this, and not kind of the giggle factor and the ancient aliens on the Discovery Channel, but a discussion that's much deeper than that,
Yeah.
right? That actually extends into academia, that extends into the humanities, that can be related to scientific discovery, right? And not just something that's relegated to a half-hour special that you watch on TV, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah, I think, and I mean, in this movie, they talk mostly about the technology and government involvement with the technology. And I think they mostly steer clear of kind of consciousness or high strangers or even experiencers. But I think that makes it, that's kind of the entry point, I think.
Right. Yeah, and there are a lot of people, I think, even within government, that think that this idea. I think I've heard Jim Semivan talking about how it's completely indigestible,
Mhm.
and I feel like it's not, if you can articulate it well enough and simply enough that people can really start to wrap their minds around the gravity of it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and-
Well, I think that's what's so valuable about your experience is not necessarily what happened to you, but your ability to translate the experience and give it a um, a logical structure that kind
yeah,
of takes the absurdity out of it,
right. Yeah, because up until this
or sees
point,
through
like,
the absurdity, I should say.
yeah, up until this point, like, if you were to talk about the stuff that I experienced, everyone would just describe that as high strangeness,
Hmm.
right? There,
Yeah.
in other words, there's no kind of structure that this fits in.
Right.
But
Kabuki
then,
theater.
right, but then I come along and I'm like, no, actually, you can find this structure within the humanities, and it's very real there, and it's tangible,
Yeah.
and you can put your fingers on that. Um, and so then it starts to take on different meaning, um, and value for people in their everyday lives, and that's exactly what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I think that this movie is part of a single concerted effort to introduce disclosure or to affect disclosure. And then, by what seems like a single group of people, some of whom are public and some of whom are not. And then I think Steven Spielberg's movie that's coming out next summer, which billboards just went up in Times Square for that,
Yeah.
I think uh, is part of that kind of drip campaign of information. And I think,
Yeah.
Dan Farah, who directed The Age of Disclosure, has a professional relationship with Steven Spielberg. They both worked on Ready Player One. And
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that those things are gonna be great. I'm very, I don't know, I'm very nervous about this Spielberg movie, to be honest with you,
Okay.
because, and I'll say that because I don't know how he's going to um portray this. The thing is, so I feel like in the 50s, late 40s, 50s, 60s, certainly there was a government effort to kind of take this stuff and put it where it doesn't belong,
Yep.
right? In other words, they wanted the idea of aliens from outer space to be a certain thing, right? And so they spent money in Hollywood, and they put that narrative forward that they were just like humans, right? And they come down here in their spaceship and they visit us, and any kind of other. They wanted that to be in the zeitgeist to the point that if you ever encountered that, that's what you would associate that with, right?
Hmm.
Not any
Hmm.
of this other stuff that we're talking about. They didn't want any of that,
Yep. Yep.
because that's the truth of it.
Right.
Um, and so they wanted you to think about this topic in these nonsensical ways, and so I feel like if you're putting out a pop movie like Spielberg so often does, and it becomes a part of the zeitgeist, it should probably be true. You know what? Or truer to the truth than, um, than would be I don't know.
Well, we'll see. And that might be uh a little too indigestible, possibly. I don't know.
Yeah,
What
you
did you think of like E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
um I think that they're, I don't know, they're kind of good in that Close Encounters of the Third Kind in particular, because it has like flavors of the truth in it.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? In that you have this character in Richard Dreyfuss that goes a little crazy, right? He's going crazy about this
Yeah.
UFO stuff. And that's like what people do with this topic, right? And that's what I did with this topic, but that's part of the journey, right? And so I think he was very good at portraying that, right? That this guy's going crazy. His family thinks he's got this mashed potato structure he's building in the backyard, right? And so there's like hints of the truth in it. Um, but it's not really the whole truth. And that's just what I worry about.
Yeah.
I'd rather see something that's more true to the actual phenomenon than something that isn't,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, I would say one good thing that Spielberg's movies do is disarm the fear narrative.
Hmm.
And I think he also did War of the Worlds, but he said that War of the Worlds was a corollary about 9/11,
Right.
and
Yeah.
not about ET. So I think that's probably good, but we will see. I'm gonna go see it. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I will too. I'm not going to lie, but, I mean, even, I don't know. I just, I enjoy good alien movies, don't get me wrong.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Actually, have you seen Elio?
Elio, no. Mm-mm.
Elio, it's a Pixar movie,
Mm-hmm.
and it's basically a kids movie about obviously it's a kids movie, about a kid who gets abducted to like a galactic federation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but kind of like I think Chris Ramsey was talking about this, but if you want to um, indoctrinate a generation into just getting comfortable with the idea of the phenomenon and not being afraid of it,
Right.
that's where you start.
Yeah. And, I wouldn't even say that people shouldn't fear the phenomenon. Um,
Right.
I don't
Right.
know that I would say that, because I feel like, you can encounter the phenomenon, and if you don't have the right psychological mind frame, you may end up worse or less whole than you were going into it, for sure.
Yeah.
And so there is that. I mean, and that's not a good thing, but it happens.
Yeah.
As I said, the majority, I think, of initiations, they fail. Um,
And so I guess last question is, how do you square that with wanting disclosure?
because I think that we could have, I think the disclosure in itself will allow us to have a larger conversation,
Mhm.
right? And about things to do with the humanities, things to do with psychology. And I think that we can teach people how to profit from experience.
Mhm.
In other words, how to psychologically incorporate, and how to psychologically kind of integrate experience.
Yeah.
I think that can be taught. But what can't be taught is doing that instinctually when you're in the face of things that are like your biggest fears,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
if you're facing those types of things, typically people start to become irrational.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I didn't do that, right? I went back to what I always knew, um, and what I had always done, uh, which I also see as a theme in religion when Buddha is sitting underneath the trees, becoming enlightened, and the armies of darkness are descending upon him, and he touches the earth. That's to say, he goes back to his roots and he does what he's always done. Even though this situation may seem extreme, you can still go back to the way you've always kind of integrated things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you can teach that to people, and hopefully eventually with that we'll have more successful initiations,
Yeah. Yeah. I
you
think
know.
that's especially true the more that this is an accepted reality and it becomes more tangible, then I think
Yeah.
those teachings will be more embraced and sought.
Yeah. And I there's a lot of people who want disclosure now because they have this belief that somehow we're all going to be enlightened at the end of that. Um, and that's just not going to be the case. I mean, I know what goes into that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I understand structurally what goes into that, and I don't see that in most people,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. But to your point,
Um,
that's not necessary because just
right.
having it integrated into society, period, is kind of the necessary dose.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I don't know, maybe it's something that you can teach people as they're going through it, but I think it's kind of too late at that point
Mm,
almost.
mm.
Like if they can't do it instinctually, maybe you can kind of steer them in that way, but
Because you guide people through this process.
I have tried. It doesn't always work.
I
I
see.
will tell you what, it depends on you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I have had people who have been experiencing things and they'll contact me, and they'll be going through this, and I'll tell them I'll advise them and I'll tell them things and try to help them. But some people within the context of this will begin to argue with me,
Mhm.
right? Like as though you're going to negotiate this with me, right? And I have no control over that. This is a natural process that depends solely 100% on you,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
Um,
I wonder if they would accept what you're saying more if you had the backing of kind of the consensus.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But so one of the things that people find difficult is that, uh, and you and I have talked about this, is that
Yeah.
there are things within this that you will find very difficult to
Hmm.
accept, very
Yeah.
difficult to accept. Like the fact that you have to give up so much of yourself that in fact you reach a point where uh, it doesn't matter to you if you live or die.
Yeah.
And most people psychologically cannot even imagine approaching that point, much less reaching it and going beyond it,
Hmm.
you know, which is why I love the movie V for Vendetta. If you look up on YouTube, there's a
Yeah.
short
You sent
clip.
me that clip, and I love that movie. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the most wonderful. It's called Evie is Reborn or something like that. But
Yeah.
they talk about this in that clip, right? About how, you thought your life was the only thing you had left until you reached a point where you realized that you will even give that up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I'll put a
um
link to it in the show notes.
right. And so people find that very difficult to accept, and they will want to argue with you on that point, or they won't go there, right?
Hmm.
Because they're kind of afraid of what will happen if they do. right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to lie, it is a very frightening place to be,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And it's also, I think, in so many ways, an elusive process. And I wonder if you dispel one avenue of fear, right? If that fear won't just manifest somewhere else, that's just, it forces you to confront that fear in the most authentic way.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think so. I
You
mean,
know, like your experience, there were things that frightened you in your experience that wouldn't necessarily frighten everyone, and there are
mhm,
probably things that happen to other people that wouldn't frighten you,
mhm,
right?
right. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. Um, and I think that is one of the reasons why this can only be affected on an individual level,
Yeah.
because this is like it's such an individual experience.
Yeah.
Um, but there are wickets, right, that you will hit, like the
Yes.
willingness to give up one's own life.
Yes.
That is definitely there, and that will always be a hurdle,
Mhm.
and um and just accepting things that you find unacceptable, right? Like the idea, like maybe you're an atheist, like I was. And so you don't want to accept that there's something beyond death,
Yeah.
right? And that there's no such thing as death and that you can
Mhm.
communicate with dead people, right? That's absurd.
Mhm.
Um, and yet it's possible. Um, and I talk about this stuff matter of factly because I think that we need to have this matter of fact conversation. I've certainly experienced it. I'm not the only one, right? Obviously.
Yeah.
So let's just have a frank and honest discussion about it. Um,
I agree. At a
and
national
and
level
right, and have a frank and honest discussion about what
or a
is
global level.
required,
Yeah.
like what is required to get through initiation. And as I said, you will find these things very unpalatable. Um,
Yeah.
for a lot of people, I'll
Yeah.
give you a perfect example, right?
I would
One
say I
guy,
doubt that a conversation of initiation will accompany um disclosure as we
yeah,
think of it. I think that if there's disclosure, it'll be about technology
yeah. Mhm.
and you know biology.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, but I
But
think
I think anyone who pays attention to the
right.
subject, like, yeah, soon enough you get onto the other stuff.
Yeah, right. Absolutely,
Yeah.
right? Like, um, and I was curious about it, right? And so I started reading, and early on, I was like, well, that all that seems so nonsensical. I'm not going to
Yeah.
believe that, right? And yet I experienced it. So, and experiencing, in fact, experience is the only way to know,
Mhm.
right? And that's the point of this, is that you don't need some physicist to tell you about the double slit experiment. You can live that reality, right? And if that is a truth of the universe, you can that can be a lived experience. And
Yeah.
what does that look like?
Yes.
You know? And so that's kind of my angle on this, is that what does that look like as a lived experience? So
That's
those kind
very
of
true.
scientific things, that people are kind of grasping at with all of this
Yeah.
UFO stuff, the nuts and
Although
bolts.
I will say, if you live that experience, you will not necessarily interpret it in the frame of the double slit experience, the double slit experiment.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, people put this in the framework of what they know, right? And it might be in terms of, maybe you're a Catholic, so you put this in that framework, or maybe you're a Buddhist, you put that in that framework.
Yeah.
But I think that I think there's a deeper discussion to be had, in that what are all of these religions describing, right? And what, because the truth is the truth no matter where or when you live. The objective truth is always true. And so what is the objective truth behind these religions and behind people's beliefs? and what does that mean, you know, and where can we see proof of that, right? And so that's how you need to, that's how you build this scaffolding for people, that you build this somewhere that they can place this, that isn't going to make them feel crazy or stupid, right?
Yeah. 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 And at least some ground rules
Yeah.
to kind of get through it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Matthew, it is always a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining me again. And thank you everyone for tuning in. And please, please, please help me grow this channel and like and subscribe if it's not too much of an imposition. Thank you so much. Have a great day.